the moment that broke the internet here. It is Nyckoles Harbor, the #1 athlete in the class, officially making his commitment to South Carolina.
My family, friends, mom and pops, without them, this all wouldn't be possible. And, I want to thank the whole community, just for accepting me, and, just letting me be here around it. But, with that being said, for the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of South Carolina.
Listen, South Carolina makes a lot of sense just because of location, relationships, good track coach, good track program. I was talking to the athletic director here at Archbishop Carroll, Brian Ellerby, who is the former Michigan basketball coach, by the way. And he was telling me how impressed he was, when Shane Beamer came here with 6 assistants on one recruiting visit when he was allowed into the school. For South Carolina, the time that they've invested in this thing is absolutely enormous. The manpower, how many times he got to campus. And I go back to over the summer when he was getting ready to run in a track meet, or it may have been late spring, and he was running a track meet and he decided to make a 3-4 hour trip over to South Carolina the day before the meet just to hang out with them. He's friends with some of the kids from the DMV, which is kind of the DC, Maryland region here, including Desmond Umeozulu, a defensive end who signed with South Carolina. It would be huge, and I think it's also huge for South Carolina's track program. One of the things that I'm hearing as I'm at the school today is there's a chance that he could develop as a football player, but also spend a lot of time doing track and field with his eye on the next Olympics. And I know that's a big goal of his. And you're talking about a kid who pretty much rolled out a football season and put up the best 200-meter time and 60-meter time in the country this year in the last 2 weeks.
Man, I could just keep watching his track highlights forever. I mean, just the size difference between some of the other kids that are running next to him. He's not just the #1 athlete, he's the #1 freak in this class. Brian, you've been doing this for a long time. Have you seen another guy as freaky as Nyckoles Harbor?
No, because of the speed, right? And I think the easy comparison is Usain Bolt because of the size, who I was fortunate enough to see run at the Penn Relays once. And it's just impressive. It doesn't make sense. There's so many aspects of what Harbor does from an athletic standpoint, whether it's football or on the track. They just don't make sense. And that's why he's the #1 athlete. That's why he's the number 15 player. You don't see this. I've been doing this more than a decade. I've been involved with covering sports for 30 years. You don't see this. I mean, it is so rare. I wish I could figure out the best way to explain to people who just started following recruiting. You don't see this at the high school level.
You don't need to explain it. Again, just throwing on his tape, it's blatantly obvious. Brian, appreciate you taking some time. Have you seen a guy as freaky as Nyckoles Harbor?
Yeah, they're playing on Sundays there in the NFL. I mean, I think when you get around like an NFL guy, you're like, okay, this guy is the real deal. I mean, I always tell people, you'll see an NFL player somewhere in South Florida on high school sidelines. I'm like, oh, who's this like defensive end? They're like, no, that's a wide receiver. And you're like, oh, okay.
Okay.
Pat Surtain, the second, looks like an edge rusher, and he's a cornerback. No, Nyckoles Harbor, I'll come clean here. First time I actually shook hands with him and talked with him was at the Under Armour All-America game at check-in. And I said, hey, man, you're my #1 freak in the class. Like, what is the freakiest thing that you think you can do? I said, I personally think it's when you ran a 27.9 in the 200 without starter blocks. And he's like, yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Good, yeah.
He's like, I'm going back to that track meet. And he did 2 weeks ago. He's like, I'm going to break that time. He did break that time. I think it's like he got it down to like 27.6. So that's impressive. But then he runs the 60-meter dash, right? And he tells me the 60-meter dash is not his time. From research I did, Ivan's stats and info department, he's got like the second fastest 60-meter dash time out of any football player I've ever seen. The guy in front of him is Anthony Schwartz. He went, 6.64 or something like that. I don't know what it was, but it was faster than Marquise Goodwin, who's with the Seattle Seahawks and has been in the Olympic trials. It was faster than Andy Isabella, who ran a 4.31 at the scouting combine years and years ago. Both those guys are under 6 foot and like weigh 180 pounds. Nyckoles Harbor is 6'5", 225 pounds. He is a freak. Steve Wilfong always brings up how he could work for NASA one day. He can do whatever he wants. I mean, this guy's the real deal. Look at him on that track. I mean, he's a monster, and he's got a huge catch radius. He's a freak. Cooper says he snuck out of Area 51. I mean, we can just keep rolling on and on, whatever you want to say.
Blair, what position does he play, do you think?
That's the interesting part, right? Is he a tight end? Is he an edge rusher? What's he going to be at the next level? And I think it's all untold. We don't know like where his best game or where he makes the most impact. It just depends on how he continues to grow physically. He's not a finished product physically, but he's got all the tools, all the flexibility, all the fluidity. He's got the smarts to be able to pick up anything, right? If he works for NASA and he snuck out of Area 51, maybe he's an inside agent or some sort. But I think he's got everything that you want, and he's just a ball of clay. And you can just mold it to whatever. I mean, he might be the freakiest edge rusher in the history of football if he plays edge rusher, right? With his get off, with his speed, with his quickness. If he plays tight end, imagine the matchup issues against linebackers or against safeties or what he's able to do downfield, racing up the seam. I mean, the sky's the limit for him.
You mentioned talking to him at the All-American game. You gave us a great quote. I'm going to go ahead and read it because I just love it. He said, he told you, I can really do anything. You give me a couple of months to do anything. I could be a 5-star in anything. I could be a 5-star in basketball, just give me 5 months to get my handles and shooting down, but I got you. He said, tennis, I got you. Rugby, that's easy. That's just football without pads. Finally, badminton. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to do it. Water polo, same thing. I mean, just a spectacular quote. It's not just the athleticism. He's got it between the ears, too.
Yeah, he does. And Blair, you're talking about, is he offensive guy or a defensive guy? We're seeing clips of him up here do it on both sides, and I was in the camp of he is a pass rusher long term. That is what I thought, right? And then he shows up to the Under Armour All-America game. First night of practices, I saw him run, I think, like 5 routes on air, and I'm like, okay, I get it as him as a pass catcher. Now, he does not have the best hands. Let's just be clear on that. Like, he fights the football a little bit, but his catch radius is a monster. He's got, tentacles for arms. He can go up and get the football. And then you saw him go up against top-flight defensive backs, and we're talking guys who run 10.9s in the 100-meter dash. Harbor runs right at them and goes right past them and catches the football. So I think a lot of people, when they break down the tape on Nyckoles Harbor, and I've talked with college coaches that are involved in that recruitment, they're like, oh, he's not that great of a football player. I'm like, yeah, but you know what, guys? Stop focusing on what he isn't right now and what he could be. He is a freak athlete. And if it all comes together, he could be a Kyle Pitts, right? He could be someone that you target and it is a straight-up mismatch all over the field. So he is a special talent. There's a reason why he stayed in the 5-star range for us. I think tight end, he could be a pass rusher.
But I want a video of Shane Beamer puffing a cigar because he just beat Oregon
I'm
and
going
Dan
to
Lanning.
his Twitter account right now.
So I need that first and foremost. But obviously it's huge, right? Shane Beamer, we had already mentioned him 3-4 times on this show. This is the 5th time we talk about him, and for good reason, because Nyckoles Harbor now becomes the jewel of this class. All the effort, all basically the time and the resources that you spent on recruiting this player and beating the schools that you beat for this ball of clay that you can now mold into the mega ultimate ultra offensive or defensive player, he is now headed to South Carolina.
What a wild recruitment. I mean, this is gonna go down in some recruiting lore. Mm-hmm. It was South Carolina yesterday when we all arrived in Nashville. Last night, Steve's telling us it's Oregon. Then he comes in at South Carolina again. Maryland was involved in this. Michigan was involved in this. I had a recruiting staffer at Miami tell me that they thought he was the best prospect in the entire country. So this is huge for South Carolina. Again, I said it when we were talking about favorite classes outside of the top 10. I said 2 years ago, Shane Beamer signed the 80th best high school recruiting class, right? That was the worst in SEC history. Now they're sitting 16. Somehow Nyckoles Harbor doesn't move him up in the calculations. That's fine. He is the prize. And he's going to a great situation. Mm-hmm. You look at the track program at South Carolina, track coach Curtis Fry, he has worked as an assistant coach for the Team USA a few times. He's helped develop 60 national champions there. They currently have a football player on the track team, Emery Floyd. That's a guy that can kind of guide him along. Hey, come in, man. I'll show you how it's done. It's a lot easier to recruit someone when someone's already doing it, doing that multi-sport thing. So I love the fit. I don't think he's going to be thrust into action there at South Carolina. It sounds like they're probably going to use him as a tight end. There's 2 other tight ends in the class. So Nyckoles Harbor can come in, find his footing, run some track, get ready. And Shane Beamer, he's the tight ends coach by trade, helped develop Charlie Warner, who was it when he was at Georgia. So I think Mr. Beamer is going to be partying a little bit. Maybe he might not be in a tree. Like, how do you celebrate this one?
I think it's a great situation for Nyckoles Harbor because I think his emphasis and his point of concentration is the Olympics, right? He wants to run and he wants to be a medalist at some point, and he's got all the tools to be able to do that. So he can do that and focus on just getting his feet wet at South Carolina, figuring out what he's going to do on the football side of things. If he does want to be a tight end, who doesn't want to strike up the band in the SEC? Nyckoles Harbor now has a chance.
Yeah, there's also a big hole at tight end for South Carolina, so hopefully he fills that seamlessly. Again, we've been talking about how great this South Carolina class is all show long. This was before they got Nyckoles Harbor, so again, the 16th ranked class nationally, just continuing to add to that.